My name is Claire, and I was 33 years old when my family stopped laughing. At the time, I worked with contracts for a living, not in a flashy way, just enough experience to recognize trouble when it was written quietly into a few lines most people never read. That's why the family party made me uneasy almost immediately. It was supposed to be a relaxed night. Food spread across the table. People talking loudly. Everyone in a good mood. No one expected anything serious to come up. It was just family catching up. Then my uncle brought out the papers. He placed a thick folder on the table like it was something to be proud of. "This is the deal we've been waiting for," he said, smiling. "Everything's finalized. We're signing tomorrow." The mood shifted instantly. People leaned in. Questions started flying. Someone joked about celebrating early. My aunt looked relieved, like months of stress were finally over. I stayed quiet at first. I had already read those papers earlier that week, not because I was involved, but because my uncle had casually mentioned the deal and asked what I thought. I didn't need long to spot the problem. The contract wasn't illegal. It wasn't sloppy. It was worse than that. It was carefully written to move responsibility without drawing attention to it. As everyone talked over each other, I felt that familiar pressure. The one you get when you know something important, and you're deciding whether to say it out loud in a room that doesn't want to hear it. I finally spoke. "You might want to slow down before signing," I said. "There's a clause in there that could cause real problems later." The table went quiet for a moment. Then my cousin laughed. "Of course you'd say that." My aunt smiled politely. "We already had someone review it." "I know," I said calmly. "But there's language in there that transfers liability directly to whoever signs, not to the company." My uncle waved his hand. "These contracts always sound scary if you overthink them." "I'm not overthinking," I replied. "I'm pointing out one specific section. If anything from the past comes up, anything at all, it becomes your responsibility. Personally." That's when the laughter really started. Someone joked that I was always pessimistic. Someone else said I worked too much. My cousin leaned back in his chair and said, "Relax. We know what we're doing." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. "I'm not telling you not to do the deal," I said. "I'm telling you not to sign it like this. At least change that part." My uncle smiled at me like the conversation was over. "You worry too much. If something goes wrong, we'll handle it." The moment passed. The folder stayed on the table. The party moved on. I stopped talking, because I could see it clearly then. They weren't interested in a warning. They wanted reassurance. Anything else sounded like negativity they didn't want at a celebration. The next morning, they signed the contract. No changes, no questions. By winter, every hidden liability in those papers had transferred directly to their names. And no one was laughing anymore. I didn't warn them because I wanted to be right. I warned them because I had seen this exact situation before. Different families, different deals, same ending. In my work, I deal with contracts after things go wrong, not when people are celebrating, not when champagne is open, but months later. When letters start arriving and everyone is suddenly confused about how their name ended up on a problem they didn't create. That's why the papers bothered me. At first glance, the contract looked clean, professional, the kind of document people trust because it doesn't feel aggressive. There were no obvious red flags, no scary language, no bold warnings. That's what made it dangerous. The problem wasn't in the main sections everyone skimmed. It was buried in the definitions and cross-references, places most people assume are harmless. One paragraph, written carefully, said that once the contract was signed, all liabilities connected to the project, past, present, or discovered later, would transfer to the signatories. Not shared, not limited, transferred. That meant if something surfaced months later, an old dispute, a regulatory issue, a financial obligation no one mentioned, it wouldn't go back to the company that created it. It would land on the people who signed. Personally, I had seen how this played out in real life. Families who assumed insurance would cover everything. People who trusted advisors who disappeared once problems surfaced. Confident signatures turning into panic when banks, regulators, or lawyers stopped being friendly. When I tried to explain this at the party, I could tell it wasn't landing. Not because I wasn't being clear, but because clarity didn't match the mood. Everyone wanted good news, a win, something to celebrate. Warnings don't sound helpful in moments like that. They sound inconvenient. My uncle trusted the advisor who brought the deal. My aunt trusted the lawyer who said it was standard. My cousin trusted the excitement in the room more than the words on the page. And I understood why. When a contract is presented as a solution, no one wants to hear that it might be a problem. Slowing down feels like ruining the moment. Asking hard questions feels like doubt. And doubt feels uncomfortable when everyone else is smiling. That's why they didn't ask me to show them the clause. That's why they didn't ask what I had seen go wrong before. They didn't want information. They wanted confirmation. The next morning, they signed quickly, efficiently. Proud of how smooth everything had gone, they sent messages saying how relieved they felt to finally be done with it. I didn't reply, not because I was angry, but because there was nothing left to add. Once a contract like that is signed, advice stops being protection. It becomes commentary. For a while, nothing happened. Weeks passed. Then months. Family dinners felt normal again. The deal was mentioned casually, like a success story. Once, my uncle even joked. Guess we survived after all. I smiled and said nothing. Because contracts like that don't cause problems immediately. They wait. They stay quiet until audits happen. Accounts are reviewed, or someone decides to look backward instead of forward. By early winter, the confidence started to crack. A letter arrived that didn't make sense, then another. Each one referenced an obligation no one remembered agreeing to. Each one used calm, official language that didn't sound negotiable. That's when the jokes stopped. That's when they started rereading the contract, not as something to celebrate, but as something to understand. And that's when they finally saw what I had seen from the beginning. The warning hadn't been dramatic. It had been precise, and precision, once ignored, always finds its moment to speak. The first real sign that something was wrong came quietly. Not with a phone call or a confrontation, but with an envelope. It arrived on a cold morning in late November, mixed in with regular mail. My uncle didn't think much of it at first. He opened it while standing in the kitchen, still half focused on his coffee. Then he stopped moving. "I don't understand this," he said, reading the page again. "This has nothing to do with us." The letter was formal and polite. It referenced an issue connected to the project, an unresolved obligation from years before the contract was signed. It included dates, reference numbers, and a deadline for response. At the bottom was the part that mattered: responsible party, the signatories. My aunt leaned over his shoulder. "That must be a mistake," she said quickly. "They mean the company." My uncle shook his head. "No, it's addressed to us." They spent the rest of the morning on the phone, first with the advisor who had introduced the deal. He sounded surprised, promised to look into it, and ended the call quickly. Then with the lawyer who had reviewed the contract, he asked them to send over the documents again. That was the moment the tone changed. Not panic yet, but concern. A few days later, another letter arrived. Different issue, same structure, same ending. Their names, their responsibility. By then, no one was joking. At the next family gathering, the energy felt tight and distracted. Conversations kept stopping mid-sentence when phones buzzed. People stepped outside to take calls, lowering their voices even though no one was really listening. My aunt finally pulled me aside. "Can you look at something?" she asked quietly. She handed me the contract. already open to the middle, the same pages, the same paragraph I had pointed out months ago. I didn't rush. I read it slowly, like I was seeing it for the first time. "This is the clause I mentioned," I said. "This is where it happens." She frowned. "But it doesn't say debt? It doesn't say problems?" "It doesn't need to," I replied. "It says liabilities. That covers everything they didn't tell you about." Her face tightened. "Even things from before?" "Yes." She looked away. "We didn't know." "I know," I said. That night, my uncle asked me to explain it to everyone. Not as a debate, not as an argument, just an explanation. So I did. I told them how contracts like this are designed, how risk doesn't disappear, it moves, how the cleaner a document looks, the more careful you have to be, how standard language is often standard because it works. No one interrupted me. No one laughed. When I finished, the room stayed quiet for a long moment. "So what do we do now?" my cousin finally asked. I didn't sugarcoat it. "You respond to every letter. You don't ignore anything, and you prepare for more." "Can we get out of it?" my aunt asked. "Not easily," I said. "And not cheaply." That was the moment it fully sank in. They hadn't signed a bad deal by accident. They had signed a deal that did exactly what it was meant to do. Winter arrived quickly after that. More notices came in. More questions. More late nights rereading documents they wished they had slowed down for months earlier. No one mentioned the party anymore. No one mentioned the laughter. They didn't need to, because every envelope that arrived said the same thing in different words. "This is yours now." And for the first time since that night, they understood that my warning hadn't been about fear. It had been about timing. And they had missed it. Winter didn't announce itself with snow. It arrived in envelopes. The first letter came near the end of November. It looked ordinary. White paper, typed address, no dramatic language. My uncle opened it at the kitchen counter while talking about something else. I noticed the pause before he spoke again. "This doesn't look right," he said. The letter explained an unresolved issue tied to the project, dates, reference numbers, and a request for response within a fixed deadline. It sounded calm, almost polite, nothing threatening, but at the bottom, where responsibility was listed, was the line that mattered. "Responsible party, the signatories." My aunt leaned closer. "That has to be a mistake," she said. "They mean the company." My uncle read it again, slower this time. "No, it's addressed to us." They spent the rest of the morning making calls. First to the advisor who brought them the deal. He sounded surprised, said he'd look into it, promised to call back. He didn't. Then they called the lawyer who had reviewed the contract. He asked them to send over the documents again and said he needed time. That was when the confidence started to drain. A week later, another letter arrived. Different sender, different issue, same ending. Their names, their responsibility. This time, there was no talk of mistakes. Phones rang constantly, emails stacked up unanswered. The kitchen counter slowly filled with envelopes no one wanted to open right away. At the next family dinner, the mood was tense. Conversation stopped abruptly when someone's phone buzzed. People stepped into other rooms to take calls, lowering their voices even though no one was really listening. My aunt finally asked me to come over one evening. When I arrived, the contract was spread out across the table, pages highlighted, notes scribbled in the margins. It looked like a document people were finally reading instead of trusting. She pointed to one section. "Explain this again." I didn't rush. I sat down and read it with them, line by line. "This clause transfers liability," I said. "It doesn't ask who caused the problem. It only cares about who signed." My cousin frowned. "But these issues are old. We weren't involved." "I know," I said. "That's why they were hidden." Silence followed. They asked if insurance would help. "Sometimes," I said. They asked if the company could be forced to take responsibility. Unlikely. They asked if this was all of it. No, I answered. This is what's been found so far. By early December, the reality had fully set in. Plans were postponed. Spending slowed. The deal that had once felt like a victory now felt like something fragile. Something they were afraid to touch in conversation. And the letters kept coming. Each one confirmed the same truth in slightly different words. The contract was doing exactly what it was written to do. Winter hadn't even fully arrived yet. The moment everything truly changed didn't happen when the letters arrived. It happened when my family finally stopped talking and started listening. It was a quiet evening in mid-December. No party, no guests. Just the people who had signed the contract sitting around the dining table with the papers spread out in front of them. The same papers they had laughed about months earlier. My uncle broke the silence. "Explain it again," he said. Not defensively, not confidently. From the beginning, so I did. I didn't dramatize anything. I didn't raise my voice. I pointed to the section I had warned them about at the party, the one written in careful, neutral language, the one most people skim past because it doesn't look dangerous. "This clause transfers liability," I said. "It doesn't limit it. It doesn't share it. It transfers it." My aunt leaned closer. "But that just means future problems, right?" "No," I replied. "It means anything that exists but hasn't been discovered yet. Old issues, undisclosed obligations, things you didn't cause and didn't know about." My cousin frowned. "But that doesn't make sense. Why would anyone agree to that?" "Because it's buried," I said, "and because people assume someone else has already checked it." The room went quiet again. This wasn't the silence from the party, the kind that came from impatience and dismissal. This silence was heavy, focused. Everyone was reading the same lines over and over, trying to convince themselves they were misunderstanding them. My uncle finally spoke. "So every letter we've gotten, that's because of this?" "Yes," I said. "That's why they're addressed to you, not the company." My aunt's voice shook. "Even the ones from before the deal?" "Yes." No one laughed. No one argued. They asked if insurance would fix it. I said sometimes, but not always. They asked if the company could be forced to take responsibility. I said not unless there was clear fraud, and even then, it would take years. "Can we undo it?" my cousin asked. I shook my head. "Not easily, and not without spending more than you expect." That was the moment the weight fully landed. Not as panic, as realization. The laughter from the party wasn't just embarrassment now, it was memory. A moment frozen in time that no one wanted to revisit. But no one could forget. My uncle leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. "You tried to tell us," he said quietly. I didn't respond right away. Not because I needed him to say it, but because saying it didn't change anything. Acknowledgement doesn't undo a signature. "What do we do now?" he asked. "You manage it," I said. "You respond to every notice. You don't ignore anything. And you stop assuming the worst is already behind you." No one interrupted me. For the first time, my words weren't inconvenient. They weren't pessimistic. They weren't brushed aside. They were treated like what they should have been all along. Information. That night, no one stayed long. The table was cleared slowly. The contract was placed back into its folder. But it didn't look the same anymore. It wasn't a symbol of opportunity. It was a record of decisions made quickly, of warnings dismissed easily, of confidence that had felt good in the moment and expensive later. As I left, my aunt walked me to the door. "We didn't listen," she said. Not accusing, not defensive, just stating it. I nodded. "I know." The laughter had died. Not because I proved anything, but because reality finally said enough. After that night, nothing exploded. There were no dramatic fights, no shouting matches, no scenes where someone slammed a door and stormed out. What followed was quieter than that, and heavier. Reality moved in. The letters didn't stop. They became part of the routine. Open mail, read carefully, make a call, take notes, schedule another meeting. Each envelope brought a new issue, and each issue traced back to the same place. The contract they had signed without reading closely enough. My uncle started keeping a folder just for notices. It grew thicker every week. At first, they tried to convince themselves this was temporary, that once the old problems were dealt with, things would calm down. But contracts like that don't work in phases. They work in layers. When one issue is resolved, another rises to the surface. Something environmental, something regulatory, something financial that had never been disclosed. None of it was their fault. All of it was their responsibility. Family conversations changed completely. People stopped talking about plans and started talking about costs. Vacations were postponed. Purchases were reconsidered. The deal that had once felt like a fresh start slowly turned into a weight they had to carry every day. What struck me most was how careful everyone became. They asked questions now. Real ones. Not the kind meant to confirm what they already believed, but the kind meant to understand consequences. When an advisor said, "This is standard," no one nodded automatically anymore. They asked what standard meant, who it protected, who it didn't. I watched the shift happen in small moments. My cousin once started to joke about how cautious the family had become, then stopped himself halfway through. The joke didn't land anymore. It didn't even feel funny. At another gathering, someone mentioned a new opportunity, a potential partnership. Nothing serious yet. The room didn't light up the way it used to. Instead, someone said, "Can we see the paperwork first?" That question changed everything. No one looked at me when it was asked. No one needed to. The lesson had already been learned. I stayed involved, but differently now. Not as the person being brushed off, not as the one ruining the mood. I was asked to look things over, to explain risks, to translate language that sounded harmless but wasn't. And I did, without bitterness, because this wasn't about proving I had been right. It was about helping them not make the same mistake again. There were moments when the weight of it all showed. My uncle looked older than he had a year earlier. My aunt grew quiet in conversations she used to lead. The stress wasn't loud, but it was constant. One evening, my uncle said something that stayed with me. "I thought confidence was enough," he said. "I thought if we believed in it hard enough, it would work out." I nodded. "A lot of people think that, but contracts don't care what you believe," he added. "No," I said. "They care what you sign." Winter slowly turned into early spring. Some issues were settled, others weren't. The situation became manageable, but it never became easy. That was the cost of signing something you don't fully understand. You don't get to choose how long it follows you. What changed permanently wasn't just their finances, it was their attitude. They stopped laughing at caution. They stopped dismissing warnings. They stopped assuming that excitement meant safety, and they stopped seeing me as someone who worried too much. They saw me as someone who understood timing. I never said I told you so. I never needed to. The contract said it for me, over and over again, in calm, official language. Some lessons arrive late, others arrive expensive. This one arrived both ways, and it stayed. By the time spring came, no one talked about the contract the way they used to. It was no longer the deal. It was the paperwork. Something handled quietly, carefully, without pride. The damage hadn't ruined anyone overnight. That was the hardest part to explain to people outside the family. Nothing dramatic had happened. No bankruptcy, no public scandal, just a steady drain of time, money, and energy that never seemed to fully stop. And that's what made it real. Every few weeks, something new surfaced. Another follow-up, another clarification request, Another issue traced back to a time before my family was involved, yet somehow attached to them now. They learned to expect it, to plan for it, to live around it. The house felt different, not tense exactly, more restrained. Conversations were shorter, decisions took longer. People double-checked things that once would have been waved through without a second thought. I noticed it most during family gatherings. Before, someone would bring up a new idea and the room would light up with excitement. Now, ideas were met with silence first, then questions. Who's responsible if it goes wrong? Where is that written? Can we see the full agreement? Those questions used to sound pessimistic. Now, they sounded normal. No one teased me anymore for being cautious. No one rolled their eyes when I asked to read something carefully. In fact, they waited for me to speak. That shift didn't feel like victory. It felt like gravity. My uncle pulled me aside one afternoon while we were cleaning up after dinner. He didn't look embarrassed, just tired. "I keep thinking about that night," he said. "The party." I knew which one he meant. "We laughed because slowing down felt like losing momentum," he continued. "But we didn't realize what we were trading." I didn't answer right away. "What did you think would happen?" I asked. He shrugged. "I thought the worst case would be a delay, a complication, something we could talk our way out of." I nodded. "That's usually how people imagine risk. But real risk doesn't argue," he said. "It just shows up." That sentence stayed with me because it explained everything. They hadn't ignored my warning because they didn't respect me. They ignored it because the consequences didn't feel real yet. They felt distant, hypothetical, something for another version of themselves to deal with later. Later came anyway. What surprised me most was how little resentment I felt. I didn't enjoy watching them struggle. I didn't replay the laughter in my head anymore. That moment had lost its power. It belonged to the past, frozen in a version of them that no longer existed. They had changed, not in a dramatic, apologetic way, in a quieter one. They became people who listened first, who read before signing, who understood that confidence feels good, but preparation lasts longer. One night, months later, a distant relative mentioned an investment opportunity at the table. He spoke quickly, confidently, expecting excitement. The room stayed quiet. Then my aunt said, calmly, "Can we see the documents before we talk about it?" He looked surprised, slightly offended. I smiled to myself. No one explained why. They didn't need to. The lesson didn't belong to me anymore. It lived with them now, and I realized something else in that moment. Being ignored didn't mean my warning had been wasted. It meant it had been delayed. The truth had still landed, just later, and with more weight than words ever could. Some lessons don't arrive when you speak. They arrive when paperwork does. And when they do, they don't need repetition. They don't need reminders. They don't need anyone to say "I told you so." They settle in quietly, and they stay